North Korea is back in the news. After somewhat of a hiatus from testing newer and longer-range ballistic missiles, North Korea has finally tested another. This time, a submarine-launched ballistic missile. Although it does not have the intercontinental range of the Hwasong-14 and 15 as we saw in 2017, it is just as much of an accomplishment. Submarine-launched ballistic missiles have been around since the early days of the Cold War. At first, they had a much shorter range, but eventually evolving and increasing in range to match that of the land-based missiles. North Korea is at that early Cold War stage now. But first, our sponsor, Mira Safety. If you are worried at all about world events, war breaking out, terrorist attacks, even natural disasters like wildfires, biological threats either man-made or from nature, or even industrial accidents, don't be caught off guard. Mira Safety has the highest quality gas masks and suits to protect yourself, your family, even children. They are used by military, law enforcement, and industry professionals across the world. It's not something you would normally think of, and something you'd probably rather not think about, but this can make all the difference in the world. Mira Safety provides protection against it all: chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear. Use coupon code CABAL10, no space, for 10% off your first order. Check them out at mirasafety.com. The weapon tested has been named the Pukguksong-3. I made a video after the first tests of the original Pukguksong and the submarine that carries it, the Simpo. I've linked to it here in the upper right hand corner if you're interested. In 2016, North Korea began tests of the first Pukguksong. They tested it several times, only 2 of which were successful, and it has an estimated range of just over 1,000 kilometers. The Pukguksong-2 was tested and launched from land, and has an estimated range of 1,500 kilometers. And finally, the Pukguksong-3. During this test, in early October, it flew only 450 kilometers, but it reached an altitude of 910 kilometers. This is something North Korea almost always does with its longer range missiles. This is because they cannot test the full distance of their missiles without flying over another country's airspace, which not only causes much political outrage, but also runs the risk of the test being misinterpreted as an actual attack. The missile reached this altitude of 910 kilometers on a more lofted trajectory. If it was fired on a more efficient trajectory, it likely would have a range of nearly 2,000 kilometers. This gives them the ability to hit all of Japan, South Korea, even US military bases in Okinawa, if they launched from a submarine off the east coast of North Korea. A 2,000 kilometer range makes it the longest range solid fuel missile North Korea operates. Solid fueled rockets give you many benefits over liquid fueled ones, especially for a missile launched from a confined space like a submarine. Liquid fueled rockets require liquid oxygen, which has to be stored at an extremely cold temperature. The fumes they produce can be extremely toxic, and require much more complex engines with pumps, valves, seals, and more. Solid fuel is much safer, and can be stored for very long periods of time, giving you the ability to keep the missile fueled and ready to launch at a moment's notice. The test was conducted off the coast of Wosan, an area often used to test launch missiles and rockets. An interesting side note, Kim Jong-un was not present for this launch. The North Korean leader has almost always attended tests of other long-range missiles, including their ICBMs and the Pukguksong-1. This could be interpreted as trying to downplay the political fallout from the test, especially with the US, where North Korea hopes an agreement can be reached to remove economic sanctions that have been placed on their country. North Korea claims that the missile was launched out of a submarine. However, US and South Korean officials state that it was launched via submersible barge. This barge simulates, as much as possible, the tube and conditions from which the missile would fire. However, it is no substitute for testing from a real submarine. This is true whether it's North Korea, the US, Russia, or anyone. SLBMs are extremely powerful and put a lot of stress on the submarine. So much so that ballistic missile submariners have described actually seeing a wave travel across the deck plates between the missile tubes during a launch. If it is true that this test was from a submerged barge instead of a submarine, then it means that they still have some ways to go. They will need to test it from a submarine to determine the viability of the weapon and the weapon platform. The missile is planned to be launched from a converted Soviet-built Romeo-class submarine, an old 1950s-era submarine. North Korea received almost 24 of these boats during the Cold War. These boats have been kept in service as much as possible, as they do not have the ability to construct large attack and missile boats. The North Korean-built Sangho-class submarines are too small to carry these ballistic missiles, so they have to make do with existing boats, like the Romeo. They took the boat and stretched the sail to make room for 3 missiles. It's a pretty innovative approach to building cheap ballistic missile submarines, without the expensive research, development, and construction that comes with designing one from the ground up. Although North Korea has actually designed and built a missile boat, the Simpo class. It is much smaller than other ballistic missile subs, and even the Romeo attack class, and can only carry 1 missile. In my last video on the Simpo class submarine, I talked about North Korea's future plans. At the time, many believed that they were planning on building a much larger boat, tentatively named the Simpo-C. Instead, it appears that they were converting a Romeo-class boat. This converted Romeo is a major step forward. It carries 3 times the number of missiles, and built upon a capable, more reliable, and longer-range platform built by the Soviets. The real interesting question is just how North Korea would use this boat and missile in the event of a war. The US, Russia, and China tend to classify their ballistic missile submarines as more of a so-called second strike weapon. These nuclear-powered boats are able to remain deployed for long periods of time, guaranteeing their ability to strike back at an enemy after they launch a nuclear strike on you. North Korea's submarine, on the other hand, is non-nuclear. It's a diesel-powered boat which cannot remain submerged indefinitely. The Romeo class is also extremely loud. This makes it unsuitable as a second strike weapon, and as a deterrent, as it cannot remain at sea for long periods of time. In the event of a war with the US, it would be quickly taken out in port. It therefore seems reasonable to classify this as more of a first strike weapon. This means North Korea starting the war, using it in a surprise attack. If it was the US who started the war and conducted a limited, conventional strike on North Korea, attempting to take out all of their nuclear capability, this boat would certainly be hit. The real value, in terms of nuclear deterrence, of ballistic missile subs comes from their ability to hide for long periods of time, so the enemy knows it will face retaliation if they attack. So, its value to North Korea is limited because of the limitations of the Romeo class. But it's an important stepping stone. It is also good for propaganda purposes, not only showing off the power and technology they possess to both their people and the rest of the world, but it also puts the US and allies in a difficult position. US and Japanese ballistic missile defense systems like Patriot, THAAD, and both ship and land-based SM-3 missiles are mostly all pointed toward North Korea so that they can detect and intercept ballistic missile attacks from the country. However, with a submarine launch missile, that attack could theoretically come from any direction, and possibly a direction that is not protected by these missile defense systems. In short, the missile and the sub are both a great step forward. While it is still a ways off from having a reliable submarine-based nuclear deterrent force, like that of the US, Russia, and China, it is a start. The question now will be how will they utilize this weapon and submarine? The Simpo, North Korea's first ballistic missile sub, spends nearly 100% of its time docked in the Simpo South shipyard. Satellite imagery, day after day, month after month, shows that it hardly ever even moves. So will this missile and sub become a viable operational weapon? Or is it more of a propaganda and technology demonstrator to be expanded upon in the future? We will have to keep watching. Also, before you go, I'd like to ask a favor. Generally, I do not like doing this, as I don't like asking for money. Unlike other channels, I almost never do. But if you like the content and want to support the channel to keep the videos coming, please consider supporting me on Patreon. I'm working now on coming up with new ideas as rewards for supporters, so any ideas there would also be great. I know it's money every month for not much in return, so thank you for considering it. Also, a huge thanks to those current Patreon supporters. It means so much and allows me to continue making these videos. Since moving, I've started doing this as my day job. I've been able to create videos regularly every week, compared to once every other week or every 2 weeks like before. If you can't justify spending money every month, I completely understand. I have a PayPal option for a one-time donation, and also some merch you can see just below this video. Thank you so much for watching, it really means a lot to me.